Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. We're joined by a special guest today. We have one of the iconic figures in music technology education, in music and recording, a name that you're going to know very well. We have Craig Anderton joining us today. It's great to see you, Craig.
Hi, Mitch. How you doing?
I am doing very well, and you've got some really exciting stuff going on in conjunction with Sweetwater that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I am really excited about it.
Yeah, yeah. So you've been writing books and doing articles and making albums and working in studios and working with synthesizers and working with manufacturers for a long time now and done so much. And what we're announcing today and what we're going to be talking about is a new way for you to bring those educational ideas, topics, resources to the reading public. So let's tell everybody what's happening.
Well, technology moves really fast, and you can't write books anymore because, number one, they're out of date as soon as they hit the shelves. I mean, it takes a publisher, months to turn it around, get it into the pipeline, and all that. They've gotten really expensive because the price of paper is so much. You have to warehouse them. I mean, there's all these problems with disseminating information. Now, videos have sort of taken up the slack, but videos are good for certain things, which you of all people know, with your videos. But there's still some things where type, where print, where images for step-by-step type things, for teaching people specific techniques is kind of necessary. So I was thinking, what can we do? How can we disseminate information in a better way that's less expensive, that's all that? And so what we're doing here with Sweetwater is the model is basically treating books like software. They're downloadable PDFs. They're ebooks only. They're only available as downloads. And that's what enables us to keep the price really low. It also saves on paper, obviously, but it also has other advantages because you can click on something and in the table of contents and end up there. And there's also cross references within the book. If you have certain PDF readers, you can add notes and comments or whatever. The other thing is that a lot of people, the way they use books like this is to load them into a tablet or a smartphone, and then they can follow along without taking up space on their main computer, their desktop. The other thing is that I have, in fact, laid this out for mobile devices. We don't have to worry about wide margins because there's no printing press that's grabbing onto the edges of the paper. There's no concern about having 4-color images everywhere. And I've made the images nice and big so that if you're working at your computer, you can look at your phone and actually make out what the numbers say and what the dial settings are and all that. So it's really designed for that kind of a mode. But I think one of the most interesting aspects of this is that the books get revised. Once you buy a book, let's say you buy Max your Mix. Okay, so I constantly revise these books. It's very much like software. You're always doing bug fixes and enhancements. I mean, like the Studio One book has, I think, 117,000 words. So even if I got 99.9% of them right, that's still a lot of typos. So, and then I'm always learning new things, and products are changing. For example, in one of the books, it was dependent on using the MIDI aux app in order to do MIDI routing. And that's the last time that was updated, I think was like 2011 or something. So I switched it over to Loop MIDI, which is still being maintained in 64-bit. So I can do those things and change out screenshots and stuff. So what's really cool, there's several advantages to this. Number one, anybody who's buying a book gets the current thing. They don't have to worry about it's going to be obsolete in 6 months. They can buy it tomorrow. And then if it gets updated, if it gets revised, they can download the revision for free. It's like a point update with software. It's like software going from version 2.1 to version 2.2. So if they've bought the original book, they can download it from their account at Sweetwater. And it's free, so I mean, that's everybody's favorite price, right?
Right.
Now, from time to time, the books go to a new edition, which means a substantial change. And in that case, if you own the book, you get a reduced price. It's like going from software version 3 to version 4. Now, I tested this model out in conjunction with PreSonus. I wanted to find somebody who was willing to be a guinea pig and take a chance and see what happened. And I use Studio One, as you know, along with other DAWs, and I've been doing this series of tips for them. And I said, well, let's tell how to do vocals in Studio One. So I wrote a book about how to record and mix great vocals in Studio One, and it did really well. I mean, really, really well using this model. It's already been through a couple revisions and a new edition. And that was just, I think, released 2 years ago. So I'm averaging about a revision a year, sometimes a little faster than that. But anyway, and I thought, well, maybe this is a fluke, right? So then I did another book on how to use dynamics, and that went really well. And then I did another one on mixing, and then I did one on tips. And so it just kind of, it's like, okay, this really works. Let's talk to Sweetwater and let's make let's make more general books. Let's branch out to other people. Let's do things like, well, I'm working on a book on the Helix, for example, right now. And I think Secrets of the Helix will be a fun book for people. So that's, right. And the other thing I should mention is that these books have extras. The one I just did, the Studio One Tips book, has over 60 audio examples. So you can hear what various effects are supposed to do. And it has 85 free files, presets, and so on. So even if someone just erases the book and keeps the files, they're getting a good deal, because I think it's going to sell for like $19.99 or something.
Right. Oh, man, it's an amazing concept, and I think it's just so exciting because having these materials available, the resources, and all of the expertise that you bring to this is tremendous. And, man, I think back to the last book I wrote on software was I think Pro Tools version 6, I think is the last one that I wrote, was a guide to Pro Tools 6. And as I was writing it, in the months that it took to write it, I think it went from 6 to 6.1 to 6.2 to 6.3 to 6.4. So I'm trying to keep up with the changes and make sure that it's current. But by the time it came out, I think we were on the cusp of 7 coming out already by that point. So that's one of the problems, as you were saying, with the print, the paper print world, the hardware print world, if you will, it's just impossible to be timely with that. And with this model, you're always up to date. You always have the most current information. You can always update to the most current version. And so you're right there with what's happening with the software or whatever other products that you're working with.
Well, I mean, the whole idea was like, what's going to be best for the person who wants to learn about this stuff? Not necessarily what's going to be best for me, because this is a lot of work. But I love teaching this stuff. I use all this gear all the time. I mean, the reason why there are 171 tips in the Studio One book is because I've done 171 things that I think people could benefit from. But the other thing is that in the Max Your Mix book, I've been really lucky. I've been playing professionally since I was 12. And so that was, me and Beethoven were hanging out. No, just kidding. But anyway, I've spent a lot of hours in the studio. I did sessions in New York. I've worked with some of the best engineers and producers you can imagine. People who worked with Springsteen and Hendrix and The Who and the Kinks and Astrid Gilberto and Talking Heads. And you can just go right down the list. I learned so much from these people. I learned so much in big studios, getting to collaborate. You'd walk into a record plant and Traffic would be sitting there, or Vanilla Fudge would be coming in the session afterward. And like, for example, the flanging setup on one of our albums was the same one that Hendrix used on Electric Ladyland, because he had the sessions before us. So I actually got to watch Jimi Hendrix mix.
Wow.
So I've learned so much, and I wanted to pass along what I've learned to like the people who are coming up now and working with stuff, because I love a lot of the music that's happening now. I love programs like Ableton Live, for example. I do a lot of EDM work myself. I do a lot of mastering. I also master pop music. I'm into this stuff so much. And I really believe that the more you know about different genres and how they approach things, the better your music is going to be, no matter what you do. Like in a lot of my rock productions, I apply what I call EDM thinking, where a DJ will drop out an instrument for just a few measures to add more tension when it comes back in. I do a lot. One of the things about Max Your Mix is it analyzes tempo changes that have happened over the years. And if you look at something like James Brown song, for example, the stereotype is that James Brown's rhythm section was the tightest rhythm section on the face of the earth. It was the human metronome. It wasn't that way at all. There were a lot of tempo variations, but all the tempo variations were consistent, and they were conscious, and they made a huge difference in the emotional impact of the music. It was really interesting too, watching some of the Pat Benatar songs, because the tempo tracked her voice. When her voice went up, the tempo went up. When her voice went down, the tempo, and it's very effective. So those are the kind of things that if you were brought up to, using a click track on everything, you're just not going to be aware of it. So I'm trying to make people aware of that. And I'm also trying to make people understand that they can add those kinds of changes after the fact. Because whenever I mention tempo changes, people go, "Oh my gosh, that's impossible to do with a DAW, making all the tracks change, and how am I going to sync things, and all that." But no, there's a way you can do it after the fact. So you can record to a click track, but incorporate tempo changes. And the way the book describes tempo changes, you'll understand where to add them and why it's important to add them. In fact, another thing about these books that I think is really important is they're not just about technology. They cover the art, they cover the philosophy, they cover how do you reach a target audience. In the vocals book that I'm working on now, there's a whole section called the performance curve. And it's based on working with, producing musicians for years and years and years. And you see that they have different ways of, some of them start slow and end strong. Some of them you want to catch their first take. I mean, there's all these other considerations. How do you get emotional impact? How do you get people, really excited about your music? What's going to attract them? What's going to reel them in? So that's a big part of the book as well. All the books, they're about the artistry of recording, not just the technology.
Right. That I've been spending some time with the huge book of Studio One tips and tricks, which is going to be coming soon. And I'm a Studio One guy. And first of all, it is huge. It's almost 500 pages and almost 200, 175 tips or something. But what I liked about it, and what I've always liked about your writing and what you've done for magazine articles and everything that you've created, is that it tends to be, I'll say, task oriented. So as opposed to describing, this is the mono to stereo feature in Studio One, your approach is, let's take our track and turn it from mono to stereo, and here's how we do that in Studio One. And so it's a results-oriented approach, I guess, not task-oriented, but results-oriented approach, where you do learn all those things inside Studio One, but it's all in service of accomplishing some musical or audio task.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting you mentioned that example because I include a couple different ways of doing mono to stereo conversion in there. In fact, I think there's like 3 or 4 of them. Some of them are based on EQ. There's one that's based on delay. Some of them collapse perfectly to mono. Some you have to tweak the settings a little bit. So if you're using, if you're using a mini Moog or a voice or a guitar, any one of a number of mono sources, you can choose which one's going to work best. I mean, one of the things that's in there is that there's a frequency splitter in Studio One Pro. And you can take each one of those outputs and follow it with a pan pot. So you can like spread your frequencies across. And it can sound very natural. It doesn't necessarily sound gimmicky. There's also a trick in there. I was working a lot. I do a lot of classical sessions for some reason. I've ended up doing classical mastering and working. And with the late guitarist Linda Cohen, I always like using one mic. She played very softly. And I didn't want to have phase issues, but I also wanted stereo. And so there's a technique that's described in there of splitting the sound from a single microphone into high, mid, and low channels. And you put the highs toward the right, you put the lows toward the left, and it sounds like there's a guitarist sitting in front of you without any phase issues. So her guitar ended up sounding like strong and full and big and stereo, but it was not using 2 mics. So those are the kind of things, like a lot of it, you mentioned tasks, a lot of it's problem solving too. How do I keep these instruments from conflicting with each other? I mean, the first tip in Max Your Mix is when you start a mix, put everything in mono, put everything right in the center. And that way you'll find out real quick what masks other instruments, what may need some carving out with EQ. And when you get it fixed in mono, then if you decide to do any kind of mixing, whether it's left, center, right mixing, or whether it's a full stereo spread or whatever, it's going to sound better. And that's the whole point.
Right. So we have 3 books. We've talked a little bit about the huge book of Studio One tips and tricks. And
well, it's huge.
You've mentioned Max Your Mix, and then you have one on recording guitar as well. Give us just a brief synopsis of each of the 3 books.
Well, the one on how to record and mix guitar tracks is, it's really designed to deal with the modern elements of recording guitar as well as the traditional ones. It talks about how to mic an acoustic guitar. It talks how to mic amps. But there's a lot of information about amp sims and getting them to sound good. So many people are like, oh, I'll never use amp sims. I got to use tubes. But there are a lot of amp sims are things that you can edit and mess with and do some amazing things and make them sound fantastic. And also you can do things with amp sims that you can't do in the physical world. So it's really designed if you're just a finger picking acoustic guitar player and you want to get a really good microphone setup. You can do that with the book. But if you want to create sounds that no one's ever heard before and go into areas that are completely innovative, like, multiband processing and things like that, you can do that as well. So it's really designed to be sort of like a course for the gourmet guitar player who really wants to take full advantage of what's available these days and really record good tracks. Some of the things are quite basic, like the importance of having a consistent guitar level when you feed an amp sim or a compressor. There's a little circuit in there called a transient control circuit, and it's very easy to build. It's the only DIY thing that I have in there, but it makes your guitar gain headroom with any kind of dynamic processor, any kind of digital processor. It improves the sound dramatically. So it really goes deep, deep, deep into how to get good guitar sounds. So that's really, I think that any guitarist would benefit from it. But what I would really hope is that it would inspire guitar players to go, wow, oh, I can do this now, and like
Right.
really stretch what they do and just create sounds that, that really lets them express themselves. One of the reasons for doing Master Mix is when people go out and they get something like, Pro Tools or Studio One or Ableton Live or whatever, it's overwhelming. The comment I always make, they say, oh, this is a terrible user interface, I can't figure it out. But what I tell them is, I said, look, it's the same thing as if you went into the record plant in the 1970s and they say, we got good news, we got bad news. Good news, we're only charging you 25 cents an hour. The bad news, there's no engineer, good luck. And you have to figure out how to align the tape machines and how to sync the stuff together and how to use the patch bay and all these other incredibly complicated things. When you have one of today's DAWs, you have what was a $500,000 studio not that long ago with an incredible backline. It's got virtual instruments, it's got processors, it's got all these things. So how do you make any sense of it? So Max Your Mix is designed to take you from the very beginning of the mixing process. First you do this, then you think about EQ, then you think about dynamics, then you think about ear candy, then you become an audio architect and you create something with reverb. And it takes you through step by step so that you can really end up with a mix where it's not this huge overwhelming thing, but a series of easily understood steps that make sense. And hopefully by the end of it, you end up with something and you go, wow, that sounds really good.
Right. That's awesome. That whole approach of breaking it down into more digestible pieces is so important when you're faced with a massive task like mixing a song, let alone mixing an album or a EP or a collection of songs.
Well, one other thing about these books is, as you know, one of the most popular books I've done was Electronic Projects for Musicians. And the reason why was because it showed people that they could do things. It empowered them to make their own little boxes, And if you look at something like the huge book of tips, it's almost like each one of those tips is a project. Here are the tools. Here's how to make it. Here's how to modify it. Here's what you can do to change it around. And it's the same with Max Your Mix when it talks about how to use it doesn't say, well, it does have some presets, but the whole point isn't to say, here's the settings you should use on your compressor for voice, because everybody's voice is different. Everybody's mic is different. Everybody's song is different. Everybody's genre is different. Everybody's studio is different, So the idea, when I see things on the web of like 5 compression pro tips, it's like, no, learn how a compressor works and what the controls do, and then you can make it do your bidding. Like if you're doing rap vocals and you want to make sure you don't miss the beginning consonants at the beginnings of phrases, oh, I'll turn the attack up and then I'll be able to catch those transients, as opposed to like, here's a preset for rap, here's a preset for pop. No, it just doesn't work that way. So part of it is to encourage people to do their own experimentation. Now, granted, the Studio One book does come with 85 different FX chains and song templates and things like that people can use, but the book also tells them enough to modify it. Mm-hmm. And I know that people find that very satisfying when they can take something and go, this is my sound. This is the way I want my voice to sound. This is the way I want my guitar to sound, or my drums,
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of emphasis on adding expressiveness. Like with electronic drums, there's no reason why electronic drums have to sound bad, So, and a lot of that's about the part. And again, all these things are covered in the books. It's about the art and the technology, because I think they really go, you have to know both. You really have to know both.
Right. So we've got the 3 books you've been talking about: Max Your Mix, How to Record and Mix Guitar, and the huge book of Studio One tips and tricks. But there's more on the way. You dropped a couple of hints there earlier in our conversation. Helix book, a vocals book. What can we expect in the future from the Craig Anderton world of books?
Well, I don't want to tip my hand too much because I mean these books take a long time to write, Mitch. I mean, every time I finish writing a book, I say I'm never going to write another one,
Right.
and then 3 weeks later, I'm like, well, it wasn't that bad, I guess.
Yeah, right.
I love to write. I love to write, but oh my gosh, that tips book, 492 pages, just proofing it. Turn it into a PDF. I have to go through every page to make sure the layout didn't get screwed up or there wasn't some kind of issue or whatever. Every single page. Now, imagine going through every single page and you find something wrong. So you fix it, but fixing that may cause other problems. So you have to go through page by page again. So anyway, vocals book is definitely going to come out. It's going to be on the same kind of idea as the guitar book.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually thinking of, rather than doing a generic vocals book, is doing separate editions for different DAWs, like how to record and mix great vocals in Pro Tools, how to record and mix great vocals in Studio One, how to record and mix great vocals in Ableton Live, how to mix and record great vocals with Waves plugins or whatever, so that it's got all the general. There's a lot of general information. I mean, a condenser mic is a condenser mic, no matter what DAW you're using, and miking techniques are, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, the guitar book starts with strings as tone and pickup adjustments and things like that. So there's a lot of common material. So I may do that. I mean, I'm going to see what Sweetwater thinks about whether they want to have different editions of the same type of thing. But I think that might be a good way to go. Mm-hmm. I think a Helix book would be really cool. It's been an incredibly popular processor, and it's very, very deep. They keep updating it. Now, here's something where the updated book concept would really come in handy. Definitely. I mean, because by the way, guys, here's 5 new amps. Enjoy. Okay, and add those in. So I think that's something. Also, mastering isn't quite what it used to be. It's a very different world compared to what mastering engineers were used to, or what people think is mastering these days. So I really think a book on mastering, it might not be a big seller, but for the people who need it, I think I could offer some insights. I do a lot of mastering. I'm mastering all of Martha Davis's new stuff, from the Motels. And I did Brian Ferry's guitar player. He did a solo album just recently too. And there's a lot of tools that are available now for mastering that just were not available, and surgical things you can do. Here's a story you'll like, Mitch. So Martha had this great cut from the 80s, and her voice was just so, I mean, she has a great voice, and her voice was great. The song was great, but whoever mixed it had just gotten a Wendell drum machine, the Roger Nichols thing.
Yep.
And the kick drum was just overbearing. I mean, the song could have been called Concerto for Kick Drum and Vocal Accompaniment. I mean, it was just, and so it was unusable. And she always she didn't have the master tapes anymore. They were long gone. And she was like, is there anything you can do? Well, I tried everything. I tried EQ, I tried isotope, I tried this, I tried that. In the beginning, there was a boom, and I was able to isolate that kick drum. I took the kick drum, I put the song into Studio One, I put the kick track on its own track and lined it up with every single kick track in the song, flipped the track out of phase and canceled it so I could get rid of the drums. I mean, get rid of the kick entirely. And then I put EQ on it and just let the bass part come through, but I got rid of the huge beater click thing that was so annoying. Now, is that mixing or is that mastering? To me, these days, that's mastering. That's doing surgery on a pretty deep level, which you can do. I've done my specialty with mastering is salvage jobs. And but that's the kind of thing you could never have done with tape,
Right.
So I think a book on mastering would be pretty cool. And, there's so much to write about.
Yeah, it's endless.
There's so much to write about.
So do you
the synthesizer program, I haven't seen a good book on synthesizer programming, really, that really covers virtual instruments and how to deal with those. Anyway.
So do you envision that you'll do all these books, or do you have, are you going to bring in other authors, or where do you see this whole publishing endeavor going with Sweetwater?
Well, obviously I'm launching it, but I really think that, first of all, Sweetwater already is a publisher. They just didn't know it. You do the catalog, you do InSync, you do all your stuff, I'd love to have you as an author in there. But anyway, no, I definitely think there's a lot of authors with a lot of good things to say, and they would relate to this model. You know, they've worked with publishers and like, it doesn't really work anymore. Maybe I'll do web stuff or a podcast or whatever. But I think they could be drawn back into the fold. And I think that overall, I mean, Sweetwater has a great customer base. They get this concept. I mean, and I think that having other authors involved and actually collecting, I mean, there's a lot of material on the Sweetwater site that could be collected into something, into a nice collection of material, so you don't have to go through 4,000, different links. So I think all those things are possible. And the other thing is that by making it more of a software-oriented model, I definitely have ideas for ways to do videos that would be different from the way most people do videos that I think would be viable as well. When I first approached Sweetwater about this, the thing that impressed me the most was that the first thing that they said was, "Oh, this will really help the customers. This will be really great for our customers. It will really help them get the most out of what we're selling them." And I said, and that's not what I was expecting. The first question I was expecting was, "Well, how much? What's the margin? How can we, what can we make on this?" But that wasn't it at all. And so I had to tell them. I said, you can make money off it. It doesn't have to be like a loss leader or anything." And they're like, "Yeah, that's cool." But I do think that no one has really taken over the slack of tech publishing these days. Everybody's still committed to paper and traditional distribution and that kind of thing. So I think that there's a really good chance that Sweetwater could become, that the Sweetwater publishing division could be like a really big deal and an important deal that really helps out the industry, and definitely get other authors involved. I think would be great.
Right. This is all
and manufacturers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an open field at that point, right?
I mean, they know so much about their products, that there's some people who work for manufacturers that I've met who are just so knowledgeable. And it's like, dude, write a book,
Right.
So I think there's a lot. Who knows? Sky's the limit,
Yeah. Right. Well, that's awesome, man. It's so exciting. We're just excited to be partnering with you on this whole thing. The first 3 books, like I said, I've been browsing through them. They're just absolutely incredible. And as from the very first time I read one of your articles in Guitar Player magazine a few decades ago, I've been learning from you every time I see something from you, and I still do to this day when I open up the huge book of Studio One tips or Max Your Mix or the recording guitars. Man, you're the man when it comes to education and music technology and recording and the whole artistry of it.
Thanks, Mitch. I appreciate it. I love what I do.
It's very true. It is very true. And like I said, we're just so excited to have you be part of the team and to be working on this new project with you.
Well, Sweetwater gets it. Sweetwater gets it, and the customer-centric thing appeals to me. But also, they had to do some back-end work to allow people to download free updates and things like that. That's not built into their way of working. Oh, I just bought a Helix. Can I have a free new Helix? No. So, but they were willing to make those changes, and that meant something as well, because that kind of thing isn't trivial.
Right. Yeah. Craig, I think this is so exciting, and for potential readers and customers and those who want to learn more about their software and about recording and guitars and all the other topics we've talked about, they should head over to sweetwater.com, and there's an area there where you'll be able to find these new books from Craig and also any of the future things that come out, and get yourself set up so you can get the updates and all that stuff. So it's a very easy process, but sweetwater.com is the place to go.
Thanks very much, Mitch.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Appreciate you sitting down with us. Always great to see you, my friend. And I'm sure.
Yeah, let's have a real Gear Fest next year. We can hang out. I like the virtual one. I got to admit, you guys pulled it off really well. But there's something about hanging out with all those people and doing those workshops and getting to find out what people do that's just so inspiring. Actually,
I'm hopeful we can do it in person next year. So we'll look forward to it.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Mitch.
Take care, Craig. And thank you for joining me here today. Such exciting news, this new publishing endeavor with Craig Anderton. Incredible books. I highly recommend checking them out. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.